Hello, this is Tomas Matuszak in Dwan's Comp 401 with the short of the long on constructors and pointers. Alright, so first of all, what is a constructor? Basically, it's what happens when you initialize a class. It initializes all the parameters and creates the object. It constructs the object. So when you say an object equals new an object, you are calling the constructor for an object class. Now, Java already does this for you. It already makes a constructor for each class that you define. It's the default Java constructor. It doesn't take any arguments. It just creates the object, but doesn't do anything special, doesn't do anything else. But what if I want to make my own constructor? If I want to define how my class, how my object is constructed. This is how you do it. So here we go, we have a class. This is the class from the last video. It's public class, a class with private integer, some integer, and that private integer has a getter and a setter. So here we go, we're going to add in the constructor now. There it is in the blue box. It has the same name as the class that it is constructing. So we typed this into the code. We gave it a argument, int I, and we tell this constructor that when we create this object, when we initialize the class, we're going to set some integer to the value of I. So we see set integer I. So that's what you're supposed to do on initialization. That's what the constructor is doing. It is initializing the value of some integer. So now when we say a class object equals new class and we give it the argument of 23, some integer will be initialized to the value of 23. Now here's an interesting point. A class can have multiple constructors. So let's throw in another one in there. Here we have yet another constructor in that class. There's the old one. They both have the same name, but what's different is that the new constructor has a different list of inputs, a different list of parameters that you give it. So now, completely different things can happen depending on what parameters you give the constructor. So the initialization a class object equals new a class 23 is completely different than the constructor a class object equals new a class 23 lol. Completely different things. This is called overloading a method. It means two methods have the same name, but they take different parameter lists and they can do completely different things depending on what parameters you give to the method. Alright, moving on to pointers. What are pointers? Well, let's start off with this here string. It's string str equals lol. A string is an object type. Unlike integer, unlike int, which is a primitive type, string is actually an object in Java that Java already has preloaded, and it is immutable, which means once you create a string, you can never change that. So what does that mean? Does that mean that str is going to be lol forever? Well, not exactly. You see, this object str that we created, it doesn't actually hold the value. It doesn't actually store the value. It points to a piece of memory. It points to an object in memory and says, that's what I am. I am this string object lol. Alright, so here is a graphic illustrating that. We see that str is pointing to lol and saying that's what I am. And to change the quote unquote value of str, you have to change what it's pointing to. So if I want str to mean what, I'm going to create a new string object that's going to be called what, and it's going to be stored in memory as what, and str is going to be pointing to that. This is completely unlike the primitive values like int. Int, it has a piece of memory, and if you want to change it, you have to change the value in the memory. You have to change the value of int in the memory. So to change the value of int from 1 to 54, we just change it in memory. We change it to 54, and then there we go. And int is always pointing to the same piece of memory. It's always being allocated the same piece of memory. It's just that we're changing the value that's being stored in that piece of memory. And going back to str, if I wanted it to say lol what, I would have to create an entirely new object called lol what in the memory, and then I would have to point str to that piece of memory and say, this is what you are now, forget the other stuff, this is what you are. And this is very, very inefficient. So there are better things like string buffer. str is, in a sense, a pointer. Alright, I'll see you in the next video for programming interfaces.